Hey everybody, this is Erman Baradi with another edition of Uncommon Grounds. It is August 12th. I can't believe it's more than half the year already gone. Up into 2020, right? But we have a very special guest today, Brendon Joyner-El. For those who've been keeping track, I've been doing a lot of interviews the last few months, connecting with people, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different political ideologies, and viewpoints, just to see where the mind's at, how they come to believe their uh, in their platform, because we are in a very divisive time. There's not a lot of conversation going on nowadays. It's a bunch of yelling. So we want to speak openly with individuals who get their time to talk about themselves and how they came to believe in their beliefs, with no interruption, no editing whatsoever. If there's a technical glitch, we keep it in there. We keep it as edited free as possible. So today we have Brendon Joyner-El, candidate for Baltimore City Council District 2. Welcome, Brendon.
Hey, good afternoon, Herman. How are you?
Good, I'm good.
Like,
Thanks so much for doing this with us. Like I said before we recorded, I found you on Twitter. I was like, oh, he's running for public office. It'll be good to get a chance to speak with him. Something that I've realized in the last few months, I've reached out to a number of people from both sides of the spectrum, both sides of the political spectrum. A lot of them have been black conservatives slash black Republicans, and people are like, hey, do you only interview like certain people? I'm like, no, I've actually got in touch with a lot of people. However, a lot of conservatives have reached out to me or responded to me. I think the reason why is because in the mainstream eyes, to be Republican has to be a certain way. You're old, rich, white, and racist, right?
mm,
So a lot of people who respond to my emails for interviews, I think they've jumped on this opportunity because they're like, hey, I think we can change the narrative. I think people need to see that we're not just old, rich white men who are racist. We're diverse. We're variety, And especially nowadays in 2020, if you look at the state and local levels, there's a bunch of people running in the GOP who are young minorities, And you're in Baltimore right now.
correct.
Baltimore
So,
has Shannon Wright, who's running as Republican for mayor, and there's a bunch of people. Like, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I mentioned this in another interview. I want to say Baltimore has like their Republican primary in June was fully colored, right?
70% people of African descent. Yes, yes. There was about 70%, if I'm not mistaken, of people of African descent. Yes.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it's different. So I saw you rambled on, but let's get to know Brendon. Let's get to know your background. First off, before we jump into politics, let's talk about your background in terms of where you're raised, your environment, but also, yes, how you came to be in terms of your political aspirations.
Absolutely. So I'm Brendon Joyner-El. I am actually from Baltimore, Maryland. I am actually a Moorish American. So that's my background and my ethnicity. I don't, or my community, we don't necessarily identify ourselves as Black or as people of color. However, we do find ourselves in the same paradigm with those who are of the same ethnicity. If I'm not mistaken, Erman, you are Filipino, correct?
Yes, I'm
Filipino?
Filipino
Okay,
American.
so you're probably familiar with the term Moro or Moor. So
Yes, yes, yes.
that's what we are. But we are one and the same. I was born and raised in Southwest Baltimore in a community called Emerson Village. Emerson Village is a mixed income community. You find individuals of all different spectrums and backgrounds in Emerson Village. I was raised by my mother, as well as my grandmother and my great grandmother. I grew up in a single parent household. Many of my fondest memories were growing up in Southwest Baltimore alongside my younger brother. There were, countless, situations and incidents that we witnessed growing up. But for the most part, I was actually sheltered from many of those situations that a lot of my peers actually experienced. Even though I saw a lot of those experiences firsthand, you know, uh, luckily I was always blessed to have that strong support system. Growing up in Baltimore or living in Baltimore City, to some people, it might seem like an anomaly that you have a young man here who's running for, Baltimore City Council, and he's from Baltimore. He's lived in Baltimore his entire life, and now he wants to do, some good for the city. But one thing that I would like to just let everyone know, what prompted me to become the man I am today is my mom. My mom instilled in us a lot of values. My mom, it may sound cliche to a lot of people, Most people or most individuals' parents believe that they should go to college or, you know, become something successful. My mom, her ultimate goal for us growing up in the 1990s here in Baltimore City was that I didn't know this until I actually got into my 20s. And you know, my mindset growing up in Baltimore was always make something of myself and always be, you know, as productive as possible. Though, as I stated before, I witnessed a lot of my friends succumb to the streets. I witnessed a lot of my friends succumb to institutions. I witnessed a lot of my friends. I even lost a lot of my friends due to the streets and the institutions, and as well as drugs. I'm at an early age. I watched this growing up in my adolescent years, and you know, through those experiences, those firsthand experiences, I got an idea of what I wanted to become and what I did not become. So as a result of that, you know, I was able to, you know, experience, you know, a different spectrum of life by getting out of Baltimore for a few years and attending school in Virginia. I'm at Norfolk State University, and eventually I transferred back home and I graduated from Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. But just, you know, those few years down in Virginia, it changed my entire perspective on life because it took me out of a microcosm that, okay, this is all that is to life. And it actually, you know, broadened my horizons. Though Virginia is only about Norfolk is only about 3 hours away from Baltimore. It still was an entire world. So when I came back home, it just, you know, it pushed me more mentally to just want to do more. And as I stated before, I was actually raised alongside my younger brother as well. So just to, you know, paint an idea or a picture, you know, my brother and I, we're about 7 years apart. Again, my mom raised my brother and I side by side. You know, we experienced a lot of hardships. We experienced, well, my mom actually purchased her first home at the age of 24, and then she lost it by the time I got into the 6th grade. So we ended up having, you know, to live with my grandmother, live with a bunch of people in the household, you know, and experiencing all different types of, you know, just, you know, uncomfortabilities of living in that type of environment. And, you know, during that time, you know, there were a lot of elements outside of that household that, you know, I experienced firsthand. My grandmother, you know, I thank her for everything she instilled in me because one thing my grandmother instilled in me was just, you know, the idea, the concept of faith. She was really big on, you know, going to church. And she instilled this into her children as well. I myself am a Muslim now, or as a Muslim, as many people may say. But even, you know, to this day, that is something that I've held dear to me. And my younger brother, you know, he turned out to be very productive as well. He's actually a Marine veteran. So, you know, my mom, you know, she did a really good job, or a really fair job in raising my brother and I. I now live here in Baltimore City, in Northeast Baltimore, no longer Southwest Baltimore, and I'm running for city council in the 2nd district. I live, or I'm, you know, living alongside my wife. We're raising our 2 children. We're both educators. I'm in the public school system.
There
So
you
that's
go.
a bit about me, you know.
757 Norfolk. I'm in the 757 right now. I'm in Virginia Beach.
Okay.
So I know Hampton Roads very well. So I guess we're kind of neighbors. So you're running in District 2 for Baltimore City. What ideologies or what do you bring to the table that you think can change Baltimore? Because we look at Baltimore and go, oh, it's you know, the inner cities are I don't want to say the wrong words, but like, you know, it's not the best inner cities, or there's a lot of things that are going wrong with the city, a lot of drugs. What do you bring to the table, you think?
Well, I think the first thing we have to focus on when we you know, talk about cities like Baltimore, or even cities like Chesapeake, Virginia, which I know
Yeah.
you're familiar with, the biggest issue that we find in Baltimore City is poverty. And when you look at poverty, poverty is an issue. It's not a physical issue. It starts mentally. It's a mental issue. And when you look at poverty, just a brief statistic, about 42.96% of the individuals who experience poverty in Baltimore City are native Baltimoreans. So this has a lot to do with not the individual, more so the political platform or the political ideology that many people, you know, subscribe to. And then you also find that on the opposite side of the spectrum, you have 12.16% of the people who are non-natives of Baltimore who are least likely to experience poverty. So when you ask me the question of what I bring to the table, I think that the three main issues that we have to focus on are people. We have to focus on the people first and foremost, regardless of if they're native Baltimoreans or individuals who call Baltimore home after a certain period of time. And then after that, we have to focus on the policy. I don't subscribe to the idea or the ideology that an individual is more or less of a person based on what political affiliation they may have. I think that good policy and bad policy is what affects people, and I also think that good and bad policy is what creates poverty or creates improvement in equity. So if we don't have improvement in equity and we have poverty, then we have to actually look at the policies that are put in place and implemented that affect not only the current generation, but the generations to come. And last but not least, we also have to look at the platform. You got to have a platform that involves the people. You have to involve the individuals in different ideas. These are the ways that we actually create a homogenous society, and we actually uplift Baltimore. So when you ask me the question about what do I bring to the table, again, being an educator, living in the 2nd District here in the city of Baltimore, one of my main concerns is education within Baltimore City. There was an incident, or it's been an ongoing incident here in Baltimore with what we call squeegee kids. These are young men and young women who, during the school hours or even after school hours, they spend time squeegeeing with their, sprays and squeegee devices, and they actually squeegee cars to make extra money. But what many people don't realize, a lot of these children, many of these children, they actually are squeegeeing to provide or make ends meet for their families. So with that being said, and it's a very dangerous position. It's a very dangerous job. One just idea that I have, as a candidate, is actually developing a 12-month employment and apprenticeship program for those students who are in high school so they can learn certain trades and become industrious, because these things are very important, and it actually creates thrift, and it actually improves the quality of life for not only our children, but also their parents as well.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is just one of my ideas, and it's not an idea that I came up with on my own, but it's actually one that actually involved a lot of individuals in my community just having feedback.
Now, when did you decide to run? Was there a moment where you're driving your car and you see something, you're like, you know what, I need to fix this? Like, what was that moment, and when was it?
Sure. So I actually decided to get involved in the political process when I was about 22 years old. I started off with activism, and I'll just give you a brief, history of who I was at 21 and 22. At 21 and 22, I was a young man, a college student, or coming out of college, and I had it in my mind to get involved in political activism. So, of course, we know during former President Obama's administration, we noticed that there were a lot of incidents happening with police misconduct and things of that nature. And one of the biggest issues that I noticed growing up in Baltimore, throughout my teenage years and even in my early adult years, we had an issue of police misconduct, but we also had an issue of a lack of transparency as well from our local government when we would write to government officials, those of us who experienced different policies such as zero tolerance, which in another light is called stop and frisk. And we had individuals like myself and other people, my peers, many of us who really weren't involved whatsoever, but were caught up in these policies. And we took it upon ourselves to actually write to our local congressional officials. We took it upon ourselves to write to our local police department. We took it upon ourselves to write to our local officials in municipal government. And unfortunately, we didn't get too much feedback. We actually got the runaround. So with that being said, that's what actually inspired me at that time to get involved in the political process. Now, what prompted me to get involved to run for office here in the 2nd District was the fact that when my wife and I became homeowners in this district, when we moved in this district, we actually noticed that many of our neighbors were moving out. And many of our neighbors were moving out because there was an increase in crime. There was also an increase in the fact that individuals didn't feel comfortable being in our community. They didn't feel comfortable in this community. We have an overwhelming majority of senior citizens and young people. And with that being said, watching individuals of different nationalities, of different ethnicities, of different backgrounds move out, and actually talking to them prior to them moving, and them telling me that they didn't feel safe anymore. Living in Baltimore City and moving to the Baltimore County, which is right next to us, this is something that it prompted me to say, hey, we have to do something that, so our neighbors will feel safe. We have to do something so that everyone will feel safe, regardless of who you are, regardless of your background, regardless of what you think in regards of political ideology. But we have to do something to cultivate our community.
Beautiful answer. Thank you so much for that, Brendon. Yeah. So, where do you think Baltimore should go? Should go next? Like, what should be fixed about Baltimore? Where do you see it in 2021? Where do you think it should be in 5 years?
Sure. So I think Baltimore, honestly, I think Baltimore City in 5 years, we should see a lot more growth and development. We should see a lot more growth and development in our educational system. I also think that we should see a lot more growth and development in our municipal government. I don't think that, and I hear people say it a lot, often, that we've had 70 years of democratic rule in our local government. Now, for one, I don't really follow that train of thought. I don't think that the issue at hand is political rule, but I do believe that the issue, it deals with policy again. I think that we do need a municipal government that has individuals of different political affiliations, because when you have individuals who have offices of different political affiliations, you actually allow different ideas and thoughts to be expressed. You actually create a government that's actually functioning. And right now, we need a functioning government. In 5 years, we should have a functioning government. I think that a lot of the old guard policies that we find and we see here in Baltimore City are dying out because the newer generation, we're standing up and we're sitting up and we're taking note of those individuals who made promises in the past and they haven't followed through with their promises. I think, just from my observation and my experience of canvassing in my district and actually going to adjacent districts, a lot of people, whether it be Democrat, Republican, Independent, a lot of people are ready for something new, and they're ready for a fresh new idea and a fresh start.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Brendon. So you mentioned the Baltimore being democratically run for the last 70 years. So my channel is not about bashing anybody, but if you can say what it is about how they did things that, for lack of better terms, failed Baltimore. What was about what they did that failed Baltimore?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest issues we find here in Baltimore are the issues of nepotism and cronyism. I don't think that this issue is an issue that's foreign to any other city here in the country. But nepotism and cronyism are two of the biggest issues we find on the local level of government. I think that we get comfortable, and by we, I mean citizens, those of us who live here, many of us have become comfortable with voting people based on a name, or voting people based on a connection, or even voting for people because they make us feel good. But one thing we have to realize and be mindful of is that many of the devices that we find out in the world, or many of the devices that we find, they make you feel good, but they might not be necessarily good for you. And this is the same thing that can be expressed when we look at most of our political officials. An individual is ineffective if they don't include the entire community as a whole, regardless of who they are and regardless of political affiliation. I don't believe for one moment that an individual's connection, whether it be through relation or whether it be through previous administration, should guarantee that they hold political municipal government in office. I think that we should look at the individual's background and qualifications, and we should allow the people then to decide and determine who should hold that office. So I think nepotism and cronyism are the two big issues.
I just learned 2 new words today. Thank you so much. But so why do you feel, I mentioned this earlier, why do you feel a lot of minorities are running as Republican for city and local office in 2020. 'Cause we are in a election year for president and a lot of other offices. So why do you feel like this was particularly a year that a lot of minorities or people of color, or however you want to define it, are running in the GOP?
I think we're starting to realize, I think we're actually starting to realize that, you know, our party, or the party and the GOP in itself, is a party where you can make it what you want to make it on the local level. It may not necessarily mirror what you see on the federal level, even the state level for that matter, but because we have been tired of the same, you know, rhetoric and same broken promises. I can just speak for myself. I'm 31 years old. I was born in 1989. I've literally lived through several Democratic administrations, and I've watched the quality of life deteriorate. I think many of my peers, those who we find on the GOP ballot that look like me, those individuals as well, they're fed up. And I think some of them are actually, you know, or they've been in the GOP, but they are now finally mustering up enough courage to rally other individuals within our communities and say, look, you know, we have to create a change or alternative. We have to do something to offset these issues, or we're going to find ourselves in the same situation for the next 3 generations. And this is something that I see happening.
So what do you think are the biggest misconceptions about the party? Because a lot of millennials, people our age, I'm 30 by the way, so I'm 89. A lot of people our age by default will align with the left. People who look like us, people with our skin color will align with the left. What do you think are the biggest misconceptions people have about the party?
I think the biggest misconception is the fact that most people think that the party is one-dimensional. I think that they believe it's one way. I believe that we allow the media, and I'm not taking a knock or a dig at the media, but we allow the media to create a cookie cutter idea or mold of what a Republican or a conservative looks like. When in all actuality, most of the conservatives I know, they're really down to earth people. I just did an interview recently, and it was with a guy who, you know, identifies as a liberal, and I mentioned to him, I said, you know, you can find me, you know, off campaign season, any day of the week, in my backyard, sitting down, meditating, growing fruits and vegetables, and he was really taken back by that, because he wasn't really, you know, familiar or aware with a Republican speaking in that manner. I think that the biggest misconception is that most people believe that our ideas have to mirror that of what we see happening on the federal level, when really they don't. You know, to be a Republican, you know, you can create your own lane. You create those core values. You may be a conservative, but you know, the conservative platform has so many different values to it that you might find one and hone in on it, and that might be your sticking point. You know, for example, mine's is family. You know, one of my biggest, you know, values is family. That family is something that's very important, and faith is as well. But family is important because this is how I was raised. And honestly, most people are African descent, and most people are actually conservative by nature. They just don't know it because they've been, you know, taught to vote Democrat.
Right. I've heard that a lot. So yeah. And actually, I think 9 out of 10 of my last interviews they said the exact same thing. You know, that's how, like, a lot of Latinos, a lot of even Asian Americans, we grow up without realizing that a lot of our values fall in line with conservatives. You know. So Brendon, who are you running against? If you don't mind me asking, who are you running against for office for District 2?
Sure. So I'm running against Councilwoman Danielle McCray. She is the current councilwoman, appointed councilwoman of Baltimore City Council District Number 2. She was appointed to the office, I believe, June 19th of last year, 2019, from the previous administration. So, you know, it's a good race.
Awesome. Brendon, where can folks find you on social media? Official site? Do you have anything you want to plug?
Sure. So you can find me on social media at my Twitter. My Twitter is Joyner-El, Joynerel, Brendon. You can also find me on Facebook. That's Joyner-El for City Council. And also you can find me on Instagram, which is Joyner-El for City Council. And my website, or my official webpage, is joynerel for baltimore.org.
Thank you, sir. Look at you. I like your suit, by the way. You came all suited up. I came with this like plain white tee and a jacket. You look good, my man.
Thank you.